We are learning tonight that more than 40 Iranian merchant seafarers have been killed during U.S. and Israeli attacks on Iran's ports and commercial fleet. That's according to the Iranian Merchant Mariners Syndicate. Simultaneously, RAF personnel have been shooting down over 100 Iranian drones and missiles to protect a coalition base in Iraq that was absorbing roughly 28 projectiles a day. The military performance has been extraordinary. The strategic logic, however, is being called into serious question, with Foreign Affairs magazine now arguing that this entire campaign may have inadvertently saved the very regime it was designed to weaken. Joining me now are Marcus Webb, our defense and security analyst, and Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor. Marcus, let me start with you. Has the West just handed the Iranian regime its greatest propaganda gift in a decade?
Thanks, Emma. Look, I want to be clear about one thing first. The RAF personnel who shot down over 100 Iranian projectiles deserve nothing but respect and recognition. That is a staggering operational achievement, and it has been criminally underreported. But here's the hard truth that no one in Washington wants to say out loud. Military excellence and strategic coherence are two completely different things, and right now we have plenty of the first and almost none of the second. Douglas Murray has been making this point for years. The West is congenitally incapable of defining what victory over Iran actually looks like. Is it regime change, nuclear rollback, simply degrading capability? Because when you kill 40 civilian merchant sailors without a publicly articulated end state, you are not projecting power, you are projecting confusion. And confused powers hand their enemies propaganda victories. The mullahs were facing a restless, economically brutalized domestic population before this started. Now they have dead sailors to point to on state television. We may have done more for Iranian regime stability in the last few weeks than the IRGC's own PR apparatus has managed in a decade.
But Marcus, isn't that the argument that gets used to justify never acting at all? Every strike on a hostile regime produces propaganda. Does that mean we just let Iran build its nuclear program unmolested? And Sophia, what's your take on this, particularly given that crude oil inventories just dropped more than 6 million barrels in a single week?
Well, look, that inventory number is the most honest thing we have right now. 6 million barrels in a week. Markets don't lie, politicians do. What that data point tells you is that the energy markets are pricing in sustained, serious disruption in the Persian Gulf corridor. And that has consequences that go way beyond the immediate military theater. Here's what I think Marcus is missing. The economic squeeze on Iran may actually be the most potent weapon in play here, and the strikes on port infrastructure, if they've genuinely degraded Iranian oil export capacity, could be more strategically significant than any drone intercept. And this is a massive but, that only works if there's a coherent sanctions architecture reinforcing the military pressure. Right now, we've got military action on one side and a completely incoherent Western economic policy on the other. You cannot simultaneously bomb Iranian port infrastructure and leave European companies quietly doing business through third-party channels. The strategic incoherence isn't just military, it's economic, it's institutional, and it's going to cost us.
I hear what Sophia is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely. We don't have the luxury of waiting for a perfectly integrated economic military strategy before acting. Iran was accelerating, the threat was real. And frankly, the idea that we should have held off because the propaganda optics were bad, that's exactly the kind of paralysis that got us here in the first place. Look, 40 sailors dead is a tragedy. It is. But we need to ask, who put those sailors in harm's way? The Iranian regime that has been using civilian infrastructure as cover for military logistics for decades. The blood is on the mullah's hands first. What concerns me is not the action, it's the aftermath. There's no plan. There never was a plan. And now we're watching the regime consolidate support while we congratulate ourselves on drone intercept statistics.
Here's what I want to know. Because Foreign Affairs is saying this campaign has saved the regime, the energy markets are already reacting, and we've got no clear strategic endpoint. Where does this actually go in the next 6 months? Sophia, where do you see this playing out?
The way I see this playing out, there are two realistic scenarios and one nightmare scenario. If the port infrastructure damage is as significant as Israeli sources are claiming, you could see Iranian regime finances become genuinely acute within 2 to 3 quarters, and that might force a return to nuclear negotiations. That's the optimistic path, and I'd put it at maybe 30% probability. The more likely trajectory, based on the inventory data and the market signals, is a prolonged low-grade disruption that keeps energy prices elevated, drains Western political will, and gives the regime exactly the permanent external enemy narrative it needs to justify domestic repression indefinitely. That's the scenario nobody in Washington wants to talk about because it means admitting the strategic framework was broken from day one.
Here's what concerns me most, and I think this is the scenario that keeps serious analysts up at night. Iranian domestic consolidation historically translates into external adventurism, regimes that survive existential military pressure by rallying nationalist sentiment almost always spend that political capital on their proxy networks. We could be looking at a significantly more aggressive Iran in Yemen, Lebanon, and Iraq within 6 months, presenting the coalition with a threat environment that is broader and more complex than what we faced going in. The RF and coalition forces have proven they can shoot down 100 projectiles. The question is whether they'll be asked to shoot down 1,000, and whether the political will in London and Washington still exists when that moment arrives. Because right now, I'm genuinely not sure it does.
Remarkable analysis from both of you tonight. One thing is absolutely certain. Someone in the National Security Council in Washington isn't sleeping well tonight, and they shouldn't be.